support women mobilizers. All politicians in this continent, especially the men, have their mobilization being done by women. So if those women were to decide that they're going to take those seats, the men would not be in office. Are we able to convert that capital so that those women also use their power to actually mobilize for women themselves? Capacity building, training, financing. And financing, I mean even collaborating with young people to do crowdsourcing for the women, to help with merchandising for the women, so that you raise funds for women who generally in Africa do not have resources to participate in elections.
This season of the Unamplified podcast is sponsored by the GIZ African Union Aware Project. A project aims to strengthen women's representation and participation in political processes.
Hello, Africa. Welcome to another episode of the Unamplified podcast. My name is Cynthia Mbamalu, your host, and with me today I have my co-hosts who have been absent for so long and they are back. Andrea.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Andrea Torhee and I'm glad to be back.
Yes, I've missed you.
I've missed
Quincy
everyone.
White has been holding the fort.
Yes.
And I have Ayo. This one, hope we'll hear you today. She's the youngest. Did we call her the Gen Z co-host? Hi.
Hi everyone, my name is Ayomide. Glad to be back.
Yes. I wanted to pull because as a millennial, I now like to hang out with Gen Zs so that the Gen Z spirits will be rubbing up on me too. They say you're fearless and you are not you're limitless or something. What's that thing I hear you guys saying online? It's interesting because today we're discussing organizing in the digital era. We've been in a period of protests consistently, and we have two powerful women joining us today. We have one from Kenya and we have one from Nigeria. And it's my pleasure to welcome my sister, Stella Agara from Kenya. Hi, Stella.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yes, Stella is the founder of Youth Atelier and she's also a governance and youth development specialist. It's good to have you on today's episode.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and the second person with us today is Fakria Hashim. She's the founder of Arewa Me Too and Not Normal, spotlighting sexual violence in northern Nigeria. And she's also a founding member of the Feminist Coalition. Yeah,
Fakria, it's good to have you on this episode.
It's such a pleasure to be on here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We were just talking around the topic. We're discussing organizing in the digital era. And it's been like we've been in a mode of protest for a long period of time. If we think about the protests, be it the protest to end police brutality or protest to demand accountability or the protest to just ask or make demands on the government to pass a lot more people-friendly policies like we had in Kenya. The proposed finance bill that would have had a negative impact on young people especially. But also we've seen a bigger and consistent protest against sexual harassment and abuse, femicide, discrimination against women. In all of this conversation, like I said, it's been like it seems like we've been protesting almost every year. There's one protest.
It's a hit back to back.
It's a hit back to back. In Kenya today, there's a protest. Tomorrow in Nigeria, next tomorrow is Ghana, it's South Africa. Mm-hmm. And I think the question for my guest today as we discuss is, are we seeing any change? Is anything changing as we protest? Be it from the experiences, Fakria, from the Arewa Me Too and the subsequent movements you've led in Nigeria, Stella, from your several tax justice reform or anti-corruption or rights of women protests. Are we seeing any major change? Or are we fighting the same old battles?
Before I actually jumped on this podcast, I was on and it was around digital safety. It was in Hausa, so mainly focused in northern Nigeria. And I guess I threw the question back to the audience, but specifically to, the current state of Nigeria, because we've watched the rules of the game completely change in front of our eyes. And I mean this in the very sense of our civic organizing, right? We've seen over the last 10 years how the way we engage in civic activity has almost like, it looks very different today than it was in 2015, and unfortunately it's for the worse. So we found a lot our avenues for civic engagement been hijacked, right? Almost to a point that, so there was the very recent protests that I was engaged with was against Senator Akpabio. So it was in front of the National Assembly, and it was still the same thing, right? We are having to engage with paid protesters, with thugs, on a degree that we've never had to. Because I remember all the protests, the women protests in 2019, 2018, so many of them, and we did not even have to contend to the degree of that. But now, the minute you have like a gathering of people with just the intention of moving to a place to protest, then you already have you already have security outfits at the location. Like the level of information sharing that happens between these agencies in regards to anything related to protesting is efficient, as we've seen it. So I mean, the question I threw is that, okay, the way we're protesting, they have to a degree made it redundant, right? The way we make ourselves very visible, very publicly, and that's how you get the civilian population, to the public, to join you, or to even know what's going on, because we, like, our information sharing mechanism as Nigerians online, there's always that expectation that there's so many people that this is not going to reach, because we all have our pockets of influence on platforms. And so I haven't seen the way we engage also evolve with the current realities. And I guess so, and I will throw this, and perhaps we can engage the question through the conversation. But the way we protest has been made redundant by the government, by their antics. So what are we, like, how are we countering that? What other new ways are we engaging to ensure that they are not blocking that avenue?
Wow, thank you. And she said, what other ways? Because the usual ways that we protest is also becoming, I mean, it's becoming so hostile to get out to mobilize people. And I don't know if this is what we're seeing in Kenya. And so, Stella, are we fighting same old battles? And how is the way we engage? How is that changing and evolving?
First of all, let me start by making an absolute statement. We are winning.
Okay.
We are winning, but we are winning very slowly, and this conversation will definitely serve to unearth the reasons why we're not winning as fast as we should. And I think we'll have done justice at the end of this conversation if we can just point out what needs to be done differently in order to achieve that. But having said that, I have had an opportunity to campaign at a time when the space was being opened up for citizen participation in the continent. And so I will definitely say that it's becoming a little bit more difficult to campaign now because of shrinking political space, but not just shrinking political space, especially as a continent of Africa. I think we have spent the last decade and a half electing the spoiled children of different families to be the presidents. And so what has happened is that we have leaders who cannot take criticism, they cannot take feedback, they're extremely resistant to any action against them, and they're making it extremely difficult for citizens to organize in the common spaces. It was previously very easy to book a national park. I'm sorry, the Central Park in Nairobi, and have a meeting there and protest and wear your T-shirts and call the media and do your press conference and go home. Ever since our 2007 election, it has become impossible to book in that space, especially because we threatened to walk to State House and evict the president from that. It's not too far from the State House, and so that has become banned for meetings. We previously had situations where we'd organize protests in different parts of the country, and so you didn't need to go to the center of the city, but you would participate in your own area, and then we have a way of consolidating at the end of the day. And it is the mainstream media that would then televise and say there was a gathering in this area and that area. That has transformed tremendously with digital organizing. Now you do not need a journalist to leave the media house to come to the ground, come and record that. It will be covered by anybody who has a gadget that can cover that story. The other thing is that there has been a lot of state capture and part of that capture has also been capture of the fourth estate. So you'll find certain nations where it is impossible for the media to say, or rather to speak truth to power. I can comfortably say today, because it is today and it is not last year. If you had caught me last year, I would not have said it. That in countries like Tanzania, you don't just report any kind of news. Just because there are protests, you don't just go and announce that there are protests. You need the permission of the state to say certain things it was that kind of situation in Kenya some time back, but then we have broken that space. The media can now say what they want to say. If they're attacked by the state, there are laws that have been put in place and mechanisms that have been put in place to push back, just from the Media Council itself, but also citizens will not allow it to pass. Not that the governments have stopped. I mean, just the other day, there's a media station that was being attacked by the government because they have been doing beautiful headlines, like beautiful trouble on the headlines. And so that too has quite transformed. The media space was a members club in the initial campaign. So if you don't become creative, you will not catch their attention. Your story will not catch the news at the end of the day. You had to compete for certain days to do your protest in order for it to catch the attention of the media. Otherwise, there were days that were set for other conversation, and therefore you would not catch it. Now, it doesn't matter which day. In fact, the media is chasing social media users to get headlines for their news. So a lot has transformed. Cool. The only problem is that we cannot allow a certain trend that I'm seeing happening of all the organizing moving towards the digital space, because the digital space has its own limitation, the same way physical planning and of campaigns has limitations. So we need to find a very creative way of merging those two so that we bring the strengths together. Which groups are benefiting from digital organizing? First of all, of course, the youth. Not necessarily because of access, but because of skill and knowledge. Not everyone has access to the same levels of data, the same levels of technology to be able to use, but at least in terms of skills they have, and any small platform they get to benefit from. Their adaptability and ability to learn new platforms, to move quickly from just using SMS messages to Mobilize, to actually speaking on TikTok and using your personal tools as communication tools, is something that has really helped them to learn. On the WhatsApp space, for example, people in our political space keep on laughing at me when I tell them that everything that has been processed by young people on complex digital media, once it catches its hands, finds its way into the WhatsApp space, and it's in the hands of a WhatsApp auntie who have for that message. And so on the WhatsApp space, women are thriving. Older women have an opportunity to circulate. Sure. The space is not properly harnessed, so you'll find sometimes a WhatsApp auntie is sending you proper fake news, propaganda, that it's moving. And of course, there's an opportunity to be tapped into there. I think the introduction of digital organizing is definitely a critical component of campaign, especially when we start looking at the anatomy of a campaign. It provides a useful tool for distributing information and distributing it fast, something we did not have when we only had mainstream media. Number two, in terms of mobilization, constituency mobilization, it provides an opportunity for you to mobilize quickly. But apart from mobilizing quickly, it provides an opportunity for you to do targeted mobilizing. If you want to reach out to women only, there's a mechanism through which your messages will get to women only. The introduction of some of the mechanisms that are used for search engine optimization, like hashtags, etc., provides an opportunity for people to search for what they want in the digital space and plug in whenever they want. I think it has made opinion polling very easy. It has made surveys extremely easy when you want to seek the opinion of people, when you want to figure out certain things and adjust the agenda of your campaign. It becomes very easy to get information. I also think, as far as giving every voice a chance, and this is the most beautiful thing about campaign for me, digital organizing has given very many voices a chance. When I started doing tax justice work, Cynthia, my work was dependent on the availability of a paid journalist or cameraman or one of the people in your team there at the get out there. Today, everybody who cares to speak is standing next to a tree, some village, a river, in a boardroom, and saying what they need to say. The space is no longer a members club. The space is now open to everybody, and for as long as you have something to say, you have agency, and you have some urgency, you can deliver it quickly, possibly responsibly, and ensure that then your voice is heard. And the beauty of it is that it has also given us audacity. I have never been more proud of this continent, that we now have a day when we can talk back to the US without our government's permission. It's not rebellion, it's just knowing what we want.
Yeah, wow, Stella. And Fakir, I mean, you just provided us a beautiful, I would say, intro into this conversation and a broad overview on the state of digital organizing. I loved when you talked about how, while the space is getting hostile, when to fiscally organize, we're leveraging digital tools and we're still speaking up, and a lot more people are speaking up now, because you don't need the permission of the government to go on Twitter, to go on TikTok, to say what you want to say. I think recently there was this young core member in Nigeria, an NYC. What's her name? I can't remember her name. She had called out the president online for the hardship.
Their core members are going.
Yeah. Did you follow that trend, Ayo?
Yeah.
On TikTok.
It was a
on
30-day challenge that she did as well, for people to rant and just talk about what they're going through. 30-day rant challenge. Yeah.
I remember she had done this video calling out the government. Then the government official from the NYC had made a call to her. I don't know how the voice note, the call was recorded and it went online. And then young people started this 30 days challenge or rant challenge.
So I think she originally wanted to start it, and she wasn't sure how it was going to fly. So after the first day, it went really viral, and she decided to continue. Plus the pressure coming from the NYC, she just said no, she has to do this, and more people were backing her with it. And it's like, you have your voice, you have your phone, you have your data, you have your voice, just use it.
Yes.
And that's what young people are doing these days.
Yeah, and I totally love that. You have your phone, you have your data, you have your voice, just use it. Andrea, over to you.
All right, so I have a question for Fakria. So the Female Coalition has set new standard now for transparency and digital organizing. What would you say are the strategies that have worked for you? And sorry, my question is in two parts. That's the first part. What strategies have worked for you? And secondly, concerning digital hostility, how would you say you've been able to keep yourself grounded and safe when it comes to digital hostility, being a woman leader in the digital space?
Thank you for that question. So with regards to FEMCO, I think one of the things that was very clear was that we were thinking on our feet, because we had come together a few months prior to October. So in June, Odun and Dami, those are the founders. They came together and started looking at, okay, what can they do? These are very much private sector people, right? But just increasingly wanting to contribute to like women's progress and stuff. So the whole idea of the Feminist Coalition was that, okay, they've spotlighted a number of women, 11 in total, and they want to build this coalition with these women. And at the very start of it was that every person that they reached out to, they reached out for a reason, right? So it was easy to see. They knew this, the very strengths and the very source of influence of each and every member. right? So this really helped along the way, because so in October, when NSAS, the protests started, and we just jumped on an emergency call, and it was that, it's like, okay, because we had a WhatsApp group. We had already started ideating the initiatives. Okay, what are we looking at? Are we looking at education, women in politics, so all of these things, and sort of dissecting them even within these parts, because also understanding, like, the capacity of all of these women. If we section people into groups, I was advocacy, right? Because I'm always there. I'm in a way, I was part of that development space, right? And serving as sort of like a connector to the larger development space, like me and Ayodeji and Kiki at the time, after Sex for Grades. So, we had been, and it had been a very tough 2019, and also tough 2020, because also like the pandemic was there. But 2019 was a very tough year for all of us, like working around women issues, because so much was happening. Like, it was very intense, and it
Yeah.
wasn't until COVID came and basically hampered a lot of progress, a lot of like funding resources that were already going to women issues, and then this public health crisis kind of came, and like I look at it as sort of like cutting off our feet. I think what was important about that makeup was that everyone came with with a kind of legitimacy, right? A, a sense that, when you spoke about something, when you committed to action in a certain area, people are going to be like, okay, yeah, like, we trust this person because they know this person as a journalist, they know this one as a tech founder, they know this one as, very different, like the diversity
Diverse.
of it.
Yeah.
I think the diversity of it um portrayed, well, it projected an image, right? That, like, we are a bunch of women and we all do very different things in our daily lives. And the fact that we come together shows you that, this is a very Nigeria problem. And so it doesn't matter what sector you were in. And, also, these are things that, we had to think about. We had to dissect, because even like the image you put out is also very important, right? And so when this group that have largely not experienced police brutality and are made up of women, the lesser victims of police brutality, in the context that we were discussing it, um so come, like, some of this, what do we do? How do we maximize impact, right? How do we achieve scale? It was also really mixing, like, strategies, right? Not just from, okay, civil engagement, organizing, this is what we've always done, but being also creative with some of the things that we were doing. So and also, like, recognizing what our strength is as a collective. What can we like what can we do really well, that, and we can see that no one else has been able to do so far. Like, since then, it was raising money, right? We knew that within our quarters, we had the caliber of women were the ones that were able to pull in a lot of funding, right? But also, not just that, being able to having the capacity to disperse all these resources, but also to follow up, there has like embedding accountability the process, like everything about femco's involvement in NSAS, outside of that impromptu, okay, you guys, do you agree that we need to jump on, that was the impulsive one. But everything from that point was very intentional. We intentionally wanted to openly raise money, but also disperse it, and for everyone to see it. Of course, like the elements of misogyny came in the aftermath, and we saw how like we were condemned, being accused of, I don't know, between ourselves, like sharing $2,000 or $4,000 each, was also very insulting, right? Because it was part of like, okay, this, it was also a thing about, okay, like no one here is going to take your money, because and it was very important for us to express that,
Yeah.
we are above this within the spaces that we work within, like the reputations, everything that we've built for ourselves. And when you come with us with attacking us, but basing that on a lot of misogyny and sexism. And one thing that has worked for me throughout, it has been like scapegoating one or two culprits and dressing them down entirely, very publicly and very disrespectfully. Like that has worked countless times. Arewa Me Too, not normal, to a point where it's like, you know what, you are very rude, and you talk back at people, you don't have respect. And I think like the safest way you can engage in the development space as a feminist, as a women's rights activist, defender, anything, is that like people have to know that, of course, you are a child of disobedience, first of all. But like for me, it has protected me a lot of times. That show of, okay, because I can't even like, it took for a long period of time, like there are words I wouldn't use, like, just calling someone stupid, just like stuff, like I wouldn't use those things, because then it's blatantly, like you're blatantly rude. Also, like, and there's so many people that are reading you, that are like watching responses. So I wouldn't like insult you like that, but I would really find a way to not use like bad words that would equally be painful and also would attract the ridicule of the public.
Yeah, thank you so much. When you were talking, I know a lot of us follow the NSAS movement, especially because we were really proud to see how the Femco mobilized resources, the accountability, the way you were providing online, spreadsheets, saying this is how much was received, this is how we disbursed it. And then when protesters were being arrested, just getting that legal support to go to, prison cells to get protesters out. That was women leadership. And I think it was really inspiring for younger women who wanted to, who wanted some level of model or needed some sort of mentors to look up to. I think that provided that sort of leadership that we needed. And if I take thinking around just your experience in Femco, because yes, you were right, there were lots of attacks. Because, here, once it's women leading, doing stuff, you will see those sexist remarks. You have, they are always everywhere. I know during Arewa Me Too, that was even when I got to really know you and know about your work. You would just see some stupid comments, about women fighting for the rights of fellow women in northern Nigeria who were sexually abused and discriminated against. But you just, rather than focus on the issue, we had a lot more attacks on the women leading the movement, and it just did not make sense. But that is the reality that we have. Yeah. And so I want to bring in Stella before I come to Ayo and Andrea. You've done a lot of movements around demanding tax justice, anti-corruption fights, women's rights, activism, and all what have you. What are the lessons you've learned from these organizing experiences that you've had? And then how, from your work, how can we demystify the political process in a way that gets younger women interested?
One of the most important lessons I've learned is that advocacy training is not an option. It's a must. I'm even trying to see ways in which every person who gets into high school gets access to advocacy training before they leave high school. As long as you're in secondary school, high school, or whatever we call the second level of education in our countries, I think we need to get that kind of education. One, because of the nature of governance in our continent, it definitely needs attention. But number two, and most important, because of the enemies of our continent. You can't be born an African and not find yourself in activism. So really, it's something that we must learn. The second thing I've learned is that information, evidence is extremely important for every single campaign, whether it's going to be digital or physical is extremely important. And when it's digital, it's even more dangerous because your shame will come immediately. Gen Z have raised the bar tremendously, at least in the Kenyan campaigns that I've seen. You cannot just come to have debates without data. You cannot come without sources. You can't come without evidence. So they will hold you accountable for not having the right kind of data. When you're moving the campaign from the online platform and taking it to stakeholders or duty bearers, the other thing that I've seen is that they will not listen to you for more than 10 minutes if you do not have your facts right. So transitioning that conversation from online campaign or from the streets to the boardroom requires that you have proper research data. Your campaign is evidence-based, that you're not just making noise for the sake of making noise. There are some what's tricksters in government who know that the thing you're campaigning about is legitimate and that they take action about it, but they will wait for that small mistake you will make to rubbish the entire campaign.
True.
Ability to ensure that you watch out for those kinds of people and not give them an opportunity to rubbish your campaign because of research data is extremely important. Number two is evidence, not just the evidence you have for your claim, but also evidence that you met people. One of the strangest stories I have until today on the tax justice trail is that there are meetings that were held in Zambia, for example, by ActionAid with the government officials, and petitions submitted and received and certain things agreed on, and then all of a sudden, no pictures were taken at the end of the visit. And so everyone walks out, and then the government official who was met says, I've never met them. I don't know what petition they're talking about. You know, men have audacity out here. They try to say they have never met you, they don't know you. In fact, they don't know what you're talking about. If you don't have evidence, the ability to do proper communications, taking photos, those photo ops that you see our government officials insisting on, they are not just to show people that there was a meeting, but most importantly, when on the day when you need to say, we had a discussion about this and this and that, they need to go to that the meeting actually took place, because people can turn on you. The other thing that I've also learned is that you need to take advantage of every resource available. I know as a continent, we are generally celebrating the role that Gen Z is playing in campaigns. But the other thing I've seen is that the older generation is almost saying we are handing over the campaigns to Gen Z. I think it's a very, very unfair demand to expect that Gen Z will take the entire burden of fighting for the continent now and carry it. There's need for a certain kind of exchange to happen. For example, in terms of mobilization, data, research, using AI to be able to analyze documents quickly and simplify or popularize messages to be understood by different audiences, Gen Z is ahead of the game. But when it comes to political organizing and how to move the campaigns from the online space, there are groups of millennials and Gen Xers who are better at doing those things. Yeah. I think every single group must ensure that they identify their role. One of the biggest lessons in advocacy is the ability to identify the friends of your campaign, the enemy of your campaign. Then please the friends of your campaign according to their capacities and the enemies of your campaign according to their capacity. You feed them everything, information, finances, all that. According to the role that they're playing. If someone is an enemy of your campaign, they're probably the last person to receive the full package of your information. If you supply the enemy of your campaign or the foe of your campaign with too much information beforehand, as we have seen happening with Gen Z in the continent will happen. For example, after the Kenyan Gen Z protest, you may have seen that Uganda decided they're going to have the protests of their own, Tanzania decided they're going to have protests of their own,
Nigeria too.
Nigeria, you know. Now, there are very pitiful story is told about the Gen Z protests in Uganda and Tanzania. For Tanzania, because they spoke too soon, showed their faces too soon, they were collected the night before. So they didn't even get up on the streets. You know, that is not something they would have learned unless they had spoken to seasoned political activists who would have told them, you don't show your face, you don't announce yourself openly until you have executed. In Uganda, somebody should have warned them that there's no need for them to go to the streets, because the kind of violence that is meted on the streets in Uganda is unnecessary for anybody's child. You know, they should have used more images that are just produced in their compounds, videos produced in their compounds, and make sure that the news gets to whoever it needs to get to. If the state wants to come for you, let them come and look for you after breaking through your VPN and figuring out where you're recording this video from, or pick you up, but we not have grounds to prosecute you. You know, very, very subtle things that then mess up the whole campaign process. The other lesson that I've learned, and I'm hoping that it's going to be injected into the current Gen Z conversations that we're having, is that you can never be Puritan about politics. You can never be Puritan about politics. There's no holy person. The only holy person does not exist here on earth. Did their journey here and left. So when you're assessing the kind of people that you're going to be calling allies, especially when those campaigns are major campaigns that are influencing who becomes the head of a nation, who becomes the local representative, or if their campaigns about who gets appointed to certain positions, you have to determine what sins can be forgiven and what sins are unforgivable. The immediate example that I have, Cynthia, and I don't think it is safe to share it on this platform, but I will share it anyway, because it happened on the digital space. In our last election, there's a gentleman who had been in the politics in Kenya for some time, national politics, had been the Minister for Finance, Minister for Trade, and then he went to work for UNCTAD, not as an employee, as a normal employee, but he was at the top, at the helm of UNCTAD. Did an exemplary job, and he was just finishing his term when our elections were starting. So he comes back to Kenya and declares that he wants to be president. Around that same period, he has declared that he wants to be president, and his campaign is beginning to catch, and people are very respectful of him because he has carried himself very well. Out of nowhere, someone produced his nudes. You know, and immediately his nudes were produced, the entire conversation was swayed in the wrong direction. Possibly the reason why we find ourselves today with a president that we cannot stand, you know. And the man was very popular. His campaign had to be dropped. He cancelled his social media platforms. Of course, he's now coming back, and he's already participating in the current organization for the next elections. His team could have managed that conversation in a way that it would have allowed him to continue engaging in the elections. And some of the ways they would have managed it is the ideas that Fakria was giving. For example, you either just choose to be arrogant about it and say, who is this who's moving the bedroom into the public space? You know, tell them you need to have some manners, or leave it to the online audience to do what they need to do. And the women in Kenya were managing and salvaging that situation so well, because they were saying, good, this guy is very endowed. Honestly, this was not very bad to look at. Capitalize on that, kill the story and move on, you know. Or you could also decide that you sometimes it's not about news, sometimes it's about critical issues that people want to make you look like you are wrong about. For example, Fakria was talking about the financing of campaigns. Hanifa in Kenya also had a similar problem. Until today, I'm not sure what part of the online accusations are true about and what is not true. What I'm certain about is that she handled finances for treatment and for the hospitalized people who came out of the protests, and everyone's bill was paid. But then the other stories that came, she used some money, they distributed it amongst themselves, all those things. Choosing to ensure that then you forget some of those, leave them alone. Did people get treated? Was it a substantial number? Because even if you received 2.5 million naira and you can account for what, 2.3 million, make peace with 200,000 not being available. It's small money minds that now begin to fight about 200,000. It's extremely important for the 200,000 to be accounted for. But if it paid for things that could not be receipted or things that could not find its way on paper, don't assume that the voices of the campaign are evil people or they're corrupt people. You practically have to weigh when it comes to political conversations and political campaigns. You're saying you want to end femicide. There are people who want to come into this conversation and justify rubbish, you know, And yet they may be extremely brilliant to hold their position, but they're justifying rubbish. They're saying all the women who find themselves in that situation are deserving because they went to an Airbnb. What do you do with that kind of a person? Sacrifice their brains. Because if you are Puritan, you then say, let's take the merit. This person has a PhD. Let's give them this job. But if they are not going to serve the purposes of the course, sacrifice their brains and let them go home, because their attitude will always carry the day beyond what they ever learned in school. And if they did not manage to take the rubbish out of their brains, it basically means nothing else has the capacity to do so. I'm basically saying the considerations of what you elevate over the other needs to be happening on a daily basis, or not, if not on a daily basis, on periodically. And the entire group that you're mobilizing, the entire constituency that is participating in the campaign, needs to be in agreement on what is important. Because if they are not, the different people who walk out of their homes in the morning to go to the capitals of our cities actually come out with their own interests. And yesterday I was having a conversation with our common friend Cynthia, and we were saying there are people who come into elections to vote for single issues. So for them, it could be just construction of market stalls, and they don't care about the finance bill, the budget. They don't care about the constitution review process, whether it is on or not. They really don't care. There are people who come in because they want to fundamentally change the face of the nation. So when you tell them to make amendments to a law, they're getting irritated, because for them, they want to talk about bigger things like overhauling the entire constitution. How do you bring those interests together? How do you get those voices to speak in the same room without rubbishing one or the other? The other difficult lesson that I've learned, and this is my most recent, and I think I told you when you first called me about this podcast, is that we have such truants in this continent. And it's not just this continent, it's around the world. There are people whose price tag is either too low or too available. So someone will always sell out your campaign. Someone will always be compromised to affect the outcomes of your campaign. This has been painful learnings for me, because every lost gain I have seen for women's rights, every lost gains I have seen in constitutionalism in Kenya, every lost gain I've seen for the continent is because someone accepted to be compromised by a force either outside the continent, like Alassane Ouattara is accepting to be compromised by France, or they accepted to be compromised by force within the government because they're in opposition, or they accepted to be compromised by patriarchal voices that want to interfere with the progress that women are making. Those human beings in my books always advocate for weeding them out very early when you're planning a campaign. Don't remove them. Sometimes they're the most vocal people. Do not remove them. Manage what kind of control they have over a campaign, because they're very disruptive. You will agree with them in a boardroom, you get into the digital space, and you find that they're the ones who are actually selling out the agenda and speaking the opposite of what you agreed on.
Yeah, you know, that's now bringing activists to the podcast. And I would ask, because we're also looking at the time, and perhaps we'll have a general question around how do we leverage digital space to mobilize, organize for women to contest and win elections. I want to get thoughts from the studio first, from Andrea, from Ayomide. We've seen increasingly the need to have women in government, because we can no longer have a system where you have only men or predominantly men making these decisions. The other day I was talking with Stella, talked about how the male ego sometimes even interferes with the quality of governance, because you could have two men just fighting leadership position. The issue they have is their ego. They can't even step back and say, okay, this is not about me, this is about the people, this is about the system, this is about getting things to work. And that in itself is problematic. But we've seen a lot of women, most times, when there are issues, we say, because of we want this to work, I will keep aside my interest for now. Let's get this to work. Or if this needs me to listen to this voice, I will listen to this person. So even in this conversation, we do believe that we need to get more women in. Younger women of different ages. So I want to get from you. You guys are younger than myself and Stella and even Fakria. What do you think we can do differently? We're heading to elections in Nigeria 2027. Kenya would be going to elections to 2027, if I'm not mistaken, yeah? How can
Yes,
we
yes.
how can we leverage digital tools to get support for younger women to contest and win elections?
I would say women are already at the forefront of the conversations online about, politics, about voting, about so many other things, and even different walks of life, about advocacy and all of that. So I think what we need to do is just to keep talking and to also invite other women to keep talking online as well with us. I'd like to use an example of I'm a filmmaker, so I always tend to go back to my field. We have the likes of Omonio Boli and Bimbo Ademoye, who just recently spoke out about piracy. And, they are YouTube filmmakers. They put their films on YouTube most of the time. And some of their films have been put out on some Ghana television stations. And they've spoken out against these things. And it's not just that they came out at the same time. I think it was more like an encouragement, because this thing has been happening to Bimbo before. And when it happened to Omoli, they all came. So it's more like a support system for each other. So we women have to be like each other's support system to know that when one person comes out to advocate for something or to speak out for something or to encourage other women, we should be able to support each other. So I think that's really what we need. Not that when someone is being backlashed, or a woman is being backlashed for coming out for saying vote for me, then we now go ahead to also laugh at them or talk back at them, in a certain way. So basically for me, it's just support, give more support to each other as women.
Yeah. Ayo.
Yeah, so as you said, women are already leading, younger women are already leading in the digital space. But the thing about the digital space is that it's very wide, right?
Yeah.
So one person's, even if somebody has like 5 million followers on TikTok, they barely have any reach. So I think it's time to start joining together.
Exactly.
Different audiences. Like, let's say you're a comedian, you do food content. Come together, talk about these issues. Your audience and this other person's audience might not even overlap, but because you've come together, now you have a wider audience to reach. And also in terms of support, I feel like the way we can support younger women and encourage them to come out, first of all, we need to provide media training for people. If you are putting out a message, right, to people, the only way they will listen to you is if the message is well constructed. So media training in the sense of like, it's not everything you say online.
Yeah.
It's not, even if there's something controversial you want to say, there's a way you can say it that makes more people want to accept it, right? And also they also need cyber training, like digital training. You should know about VPNs if you're going to be
VPNs are important.
To be online, right?
Yeah.
You should know about VPNs. You should also know about things like phishing. Even people that are so careful, they don't know that there are crazy people out there, right? Even if you have a VPN, there's a way you'll be standing in your video and somebody will just say, oh, I know that sign.
Yeah.
And that's how they'll come and find you.
Is.
Right? So you should know these things when you want to engage in the online space. You should be safe. You should provide more ways that younger women can be safer online to encourage them more to speak out on issues in the digital space.
Yeah, I think you had a question for Fakria.
Yes. So Fakria, in a lot of states in Nigeria, we don't have any women in the state assemblies and also in National Assembly as well. We also don't have any female governors. So in your opinion, do you think that it's possible for a woman to emerge as a governor in the 2027 elections? How do you think we can get women into state assemblies, especially in religiously conservative states?
One of the things that, so I'll give you an example, right? If you go to Kano or Sejiga, I'll give you real examples. So in Kano, there is, and Human Angle covered this. In Kano, there's this depraved practice that, so when a woman is pregnant and she's about to give birth, the man runs away because he can't foot the bills, and also like just being there for such a momentous event, they just disappear. And so, like, in the past decades, there's been this woman in a very um like in the very middle of like Kano. In Hausa, we say chicken gari. She's known across Kano that whenever this happens, so they call her. And in some cases, these women, it's not even like normal birth. They have to do a CS or something. And you know how expensive that is.
Yeah.
Even in public hospitals, for a lot of Nigerians, especially now, is that they we can't afford a range of things, right? And so things have always been like this in certain communities. So she'll come, pick the pregnant lady up, take her to the hospital, foot the bills, and like she's run on donations all these decades. And learning about women like that, or the women in Jigawa that they don't have a hospital close to their local government, and they would have to um you know it's just a complicated process for them to get to the hospital. So they pooled their resources and they bought a car, right? And this is all coming out of the leadership of one person or two people. These are women that have replaced the actual functions of political leadership within their community without really grasping to the full extent what it is that they're doing. They are like in the absence of governance, which in so many parts, especially now, that's the reality. Our government is absent in so many places, and that's
Yeah.
absence of services, particularly. Like for me, like the way I look at this is that these women are already in leadership positions. Yes, they may not have had conventional like higher degrees and stuff, but most of our politicians don't. Even like our president's university degree is in dispute, right? And so and I think this requires a mindset shift. This requires advocacy, because the difference between those women being in the State House of Assembly is that they believe that that's not where they belong. They believe that the work that they're doing, that's where they belong. And you never know where a mindset shift leads you. And so there's need to actually map and find, because in every community, in every local government, this is a project that I've always wanted to, something that I want to do, but I haven't done it. And so everywhere I go, I'm putting it out there, because then, we understand that leadership comes from many different places. On Twitter yesterday, someone was throwing a jab at, I guess, Labour Party members that, oh, people have elected Okada riders and blah, blah. But like being an Okada rider is a legitimate, honest business, right?
Yeah.
And a mindset, like we need to really reframe because like I wish, I see the way like Stella is so full of optimism and also the drive. And you get to have that when like you're from a society like Kenya, right? That they've not gone down the hole as deep as we are. The way I see it, we're more like in your where you told us about Uganda. It's almost Nigeria is becoming that. And I remember like 10 years ago when Nigerians would stand up and be like, no one dare do this here. No,
Yeah.
Nigerians were loud, were outspoken. But all of that, it took this guy to muzzle our entire society. We have an economy of sycophants, and that's basically like the fuel this entire country is running on. So I think we need to start thinking about mobilizing women in leadership from a different standpoint. I'm not saying like that woman now becomes governor. No. But there are levels to these things. There is councillor, there are state assemblies, there's stuff. So like being able to work closely with these women would allow them to actually see everyone you see dreams of a bigger life.
Yeah.
And most people are restrained by their cultures and by their beliefs. And the little push, the little sensitization, and just the little investment in time with these women, like, you need to be able to do that. So last November, I was invited to be part of this consortium of women from all across Africa. And these are women that work in democracy, governance, and gender issues, or at the intersection of any of these. And it was very much intergenerational, right? We had women from South Sudan, Kenya, South Africa, so like Liberia. And like one thing that really stood out for me, because as part of the program, the Liberian Nobel Peace Prize, Miss Lima, right? I hope I'm not butchering her name. So we were with Miss Lima throughout the few days that we were there. And so during one evening, this was not part of our schedule. We all sat down in a circle, and she was telling us about the history of her mobilization, which is in her book. But one thing I realized is that us, the younger generation, we are not able to adequately mobilize women like the older generation, like the generation of people like Miss Lima, right? We haven't been able to. And it is because that we like a lot of we do so many different things. We are committed to many things, right? Within either has to do with our work, but a lot of us are doing things on the side because also the society demands it, right? For us to actually live, to be above water. Everything that she said during that meeting really stood out for me, mainly because of how they were mobilizing for peace in Liberia, but they were mobilizing for peace in Liberia with other African women. They were mobilizing within and outside. And this was a person that was very dedicated, right? In a way that her life revolved around women mobilization. And so, and the essence to it was that she knew them, she knew all their issues. It's almost like the way our parents did community. It was just like that, but it was sustainable. We have to look back and see what really works. But also, of course, like, our context is very different in terms of like the way we organize. Even the way that we're threatened is very different. Like than like the horrors that they faced is very different than what we do. But there's so much to learn, because we, like, no matter how digital our world has become, you look at our communities, they are very much offline. We are like a chunk of our society, like, we can meet them offline. Our engagements and stuff would be different, right? And so I wanted to just add that, because these are things that I've come to really learn from other people, like, of course, like what you've experienced, but most of the time it's like it stops at those experiences, right? And I guess, especially if you're from like northern Nigeria, we don't really like to open up. We don't really like to shred things, take them apart and look at them. But it's very important that we did, because Nigeria is very hostile right now. Like, I look at people and I understand you can't deal with the economic fallout and then the political fallout. We're demanding too much of ordinary Nigerians.
Thank you. And we're rounding up, actually. The other day I was talking about, I think maybe to Stella also, and then to someone else, the young lady in Sokoto that did a video calling out the governor for a lot of horrible things happening in our community, Hamdia City. And then she was arrested and she's been persecuted. There was actually an initial sentence, but thankfully for lawyers, they are appealing that. She's barely 18 years old. All she did was a video from her village speaking in Hausa language, calling out the governor with legitimate issues on the attacks in their communities, the poor state of livelihood. But yet this girl has experienced the kinds of inhumane treatment a child, I'll call that, to me, she's still a child. A child shouldn't even have to experience. But that's the context that we're dealing. And so if we keep talking around, we need to leverage these digital platforms to organize. We also need to consciously educate young women, speaking of, on how to protect themselves, how to build communities around themselves, and how to build networks that can provide safeguards while they engage. And so what to be your final thought, Stella, to every young woman listening? What would be your advice to them on what they can do differently when it comes to organizing? And the second is how best to support younger women ahead of the next elections in both Nigeria and Kenya.
It may look difficult, it may look complicated, it may look stressful. They should not give up. The opportunity is always available to create change. That's one. Number two, Kenya is currently enjoying freedoms that were not there about a decade or so ago. One of the things that happened is that our second president consolidated power slowly, that by the time we realized we were under a dictatorship, we could not speak, you could not practically, there was a time you could not even raise your two fingers like this because it meant you were supporting the opposition. And there are entire communities where people have a missing finger because the president gave instructions that anybody who raises that finger, it has to be cut off. We have actually lived under the kind of oppression that Nigeria sees itself in now. The secret is to, and Cynthia, you say this in the conversation that we had on phone, is to maintain voice. And when it becomes too dangerous, don't try to be a hero, don't show up alone and try to be the only person who's speaking about it. There is strength in solidarity. I don't know that it's Andrea or somebody else in the conversation who mentioned that we need to support each other, we need to back each other up. Solidarity and ensuring that anytime the oppressor picks up the gun to point it at us, they can't find one person to put the laser on. It's extremely, extremely important for safety. Just like in first aid, the safety of the first aider is the most important thing before you start administering support to other people. In campaign, if you are dead, you are useless because that is when your voice is gone. So just trying to make sure you're safe. I think generally what they should do differently is to ensure that then they're not just having conversations about space being created for them, but they're actually having conversations about ensuring that the space that is being created is not a favor. It's a system, not coming as part of a small policy affirmative action. Cynthia, you and I did the Nelson Mandela Women in Public Policy program together, and you remember how we underscored the importance of legislating the opportunity of women, especially because patriarchy has refused to go to bed. It operates like the devil. So you create space today, women enjoy for some time, and then a funny head takes up power and they start demolishing everything that has been created. Legislating access and legislating rules for a level playing ground is extremely important. One of the wins that Kenya has now is that any space that women have to participate is within the constitution. And we may not necessarily have succeeded as far as elective politics is to get as many women on those platforms, but on any appointive positions, we practically go to court and nullify some of the appointments until we are sure that there's 2/3 gender rule implemented. And so it's extremely important to legislate. Just because we have discovered that the people we are dealing with are not keen on following up on commitments that they make towards women. Elevate the conversation. Elevate the conversation, rise above the topics that men bring up in trolling. You know, men will constantly remind you that women are their own enemies, or women cannot lead. When women lead, they bring in other issues into leadership. Rise above those conversations. In fact, if you can ignore them, you will save a lot of time, because men will trivialize every conversation so that they make it look like there are smaller things that women should be paying attention to. The other day, I was reading a post online. There's a lady who was attacked in Kenya during the Easter holiday while she was traveling by bus. The bus company refused to identify provide the credentials or the details of the person who was sitting next to her. She knows very well that the person sitting next to her is the one who must have dragged her, but they have refused to provide the details. So by Easter Monday, she was still complaining. And I remember calling out the National Gender Commission in Kenya and the Inspector General of Police and saying, why is a woman begging for services like this. This is not something that you should be begging for. You should be ordering the bus company to produce the details of the person who was sitting next to her. They're the first suspect. You know, my distress was that on the comment section of her post, where she had now gotten some media house to tell her story, some young men were saying this one looks like she enjoyed herself, because part of her complaint, when she woke up in a hospital, she didn't have her underwear. Not allowing that kind of stupid conversations to happen inside the main conversation about women's representation is extremely critical. Catch them early. I like that Fakria has mentioned. Catch them early. Select them from among serendipitous leaders, people who are already leading in the absence of funds, in the absence of campaigns. So because then when you give them more power and authority, they'll then conduct themselves in a good way. Support women mobilizers. All politicians in this continent, especially the men, have their mobilization being done by women. So if those women were to decide that they're going to take those seats, the men would not be in office. Are we able to convert that capital so that those women also use their power to actually mobilize for women themselves? Capacity building, training, financing. And financing, I mean even collaborating with young people to do crowdsourcing for the women, to help with merchandising for the women, so that you raise funds for women who generally in Africa do not have resources to participate in elections.
Thank you so much, Stella. I'm sorry I have to cut you here. So much to say, very little time, but honestly, both of you have been amazing. Thank you so much, Stella, Agara, and thank you so much for Fakria.
I think we need to do a town hall.
Yes, I think we need a town hall actually, because you know, when you were just talking, like a lot of topics were coming up. Yes, we do actually, because these are broad issues, but that's our reality. It's not a very happy reality, but it's something we need to keep fighting until we get somewhere reasonable, right? And I'll leave it to my co-host to shout out to our audience.
Thank you so much for watching, our wonderful audience. Make sure you follow us on all our social media handles at the Unamplified Podcast on Instagram, X, TikTok, and also make sure you listen to our podcast on Spotify at the Unamplified Podcast, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Ayo.
And also, I want to say thank you to everyone behind the scenes, our producer, DJ Drexx, our director, Hamilton Odems, cinematographer, Fredcoker, assistant cinematographers, EPI and Alan, and also to Quincy Y behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you. When you're on,
You're amplified.
Yes, to Africa.